Thank you, Allison, for that introduction. And I am really happy to be with you today. It's really exciting to see how many participants there are from all over the place. It's really indicative of the high level of interest in this subject and the wide diaspora of people from this part of the world. Researching in Eastern Europe it has been kind of shrouded somewhat in mystery for many people throughout much of our lifetimes. Many of us grew up during the period when it was all behind the Iron Curtain, as Winston Churchill dubbed it in 1946, following World War II, as the Soviet Union dominated the region and formed the Warsaw Pact, and the communist influence spread, and travel to and from this area was restricted, and certainly there were the opportunity to get records out of there or to visit archives there was pretty much out of the question for many decades. But now it's hard to believe it, but it's already been 30 years, more than 30 years since the Berlin Wall fell, and 30 years since the Soviet Union collapsed. In fact, it's been 30 years since I first visited St. Petersburg, Russia in 1991, just months after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And with that, in the decades that have followed, there's been some fluctuation in terms of the degree of openness of these countries. There's been windows of opportunity to go in and obtain records. Some of those windows have since closed, at least to some extent, while others are continuing to remain open and open wider. So in this presentation, we're going to just kind of have a whirlwind tour through research in this area, the historical geography of the region, and kind of open that curtain up and give you a view into the possibilities here. Don't expect you to memorize everything that we're going to go over, of course. There is a handout, and there's links in the handout also to other resources where you can learn about many of these things. We're going to talk about some of the tools that can help you to learn more and to refresh your memory of what you've learned. So we're going to start off with talking about the historical geography and kind of defining what we mean by Eastern Europe. There are varying definitions of this term. And really, to be honest, it's somewhat arbitrary. Our ancestors, as they left this region, didn't refer to themselves as Eastern Europeans or said that they were from Eastern Europe. More likely, they were going to identify by whatever ethnic or religious group that they belonged to and whatever nation that they happened to be living under when they moved, such as Austria or the Russian Empire, for example. So the definition that I personally like to use is the boundaries of what was referred to as the Iron Curtain. So the former Soviet Union countries in Europe, with that are usually included the Trans-Caucasian countries of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, although they're technically part of the Asian continent. They are often affiliated with Europe, and so we include those countries. The former Yugoslavia country, which is now divided into numerous other countries, and the countries of the former Warsaw Pact. If you actually are to measure the geographic center of Europe, there are varying definitions. These are just 4 of them. There are lots of other claimants. These are the 4 that I think are the most scientifically based, depending on how you define and choose to measure that geographic center. But you can see that all of them actually fall within this area that we I define as Eastern Europe. So some of these countries are often also classed as part of Central Europe. And when you're doing research in this area and you're looking up resources, you might also consider looking under Central European resources for information, especially if you're looking, for example, for Poland or Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, etc. All right, now we're going to do a little whirlwind historical tour through Europe from 1700 to the present. I would refer you to Wikipedia or other encyclopedic resources and another source that I'll mention a little bit later to keep track of all this, but just sit back and enjoy a little quick historical review. So in 1700, this is the map of Europe. At that time, Germany did not exist as a country. The constituent duchies, kingdoms, etc. of Germany were part of what was termed the Holy Roman Empire, which was really kind of more of a loose confederation of Germanic states. The Habsburg monarchy, which is the precursor to the Austrian Empire, straddled the boundaries between the Holy Roman Empire and more to the east of it. A country that is often forgotten in history is the Commonwealth of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, formerly the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and Poland, which had been aligned since the 1300s and was one of the largest and most powerful countries of Europe at that time. This is a map showing the full extent of Poland-Lithuania in the 1600s, and you can see that it encompassed not only Lithuania and most of what is today Poland, but also most of Ukraine, all of Latvia, half of Estonia, and a pretty good chunk of Russia, as well as little bits of Romania and Moldova. Well, when Peter the Great came to power in the Russian Empire, one of the first things that he did was fight with Sweden to take over lands of the Baltic states and also up by the Gulf of Finland, and establish a new capital of the Russian Empire in St. Petersburg. And later that same century, Poland, Lithuania was completely wiped from the map in what is referred to as the partitions of Poland, probably more properly the partitions of Poland, Lithuania, as the Austrian Empire, the Prussian Empire, and the Russian Empire each took chunks until by 1795, Poland, Lithuania was completely wiped from the map. It briefly came back into existence, some semblance of it, with the Duchy of Warsaw under Napoleon, but as Napoleon was defeated in 1815, that was short-lived. So as we look at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, as Napoleon was defeated, the Congress of Vienna established new boundaries of Europe, and you can see that much of Poland became subject to the Russian Empire. Prussia and Austria retained lands that they had previously acquired from Poland, Lithuania. The Ottoman Empire, which had been growing in influence in Europe, extended up into much of what is now Romania and a lot of the Balkan Peninsula. And at that time, Germany was still splintered into a lot of different countries, Prussia being the most dominant of those. Later in the 1800s, in 1878, by this time, Germany had become unified. There was the Russo-Turkish War, and lands that Russia had obtained from the Ottoman Empire along the coast of the Black Sea and the Crimean Peninsula were confirmed to be part of Russia, and the Ottoman Empire gave up a lot of its territory in the Balkan Peninsula, losing some of it to Austria and some of it becoming independent countries. And so this is the map of Europe that dominated pretty much the 19th century and into the early 20th century up until the beginning of the First World War, with the Russian Empire, Austrian Empire, or Austro-Hungarian Empire, as we often call it, and the German Empire dominating this region, and a few relatively newly independent countries in the Balkans also being in existence at that time. This is a map that is in your handout that shows an overlay of those pre-World War I boundaries, 1914, with modern boundaries. So you can compare those two. If you're going to memorize any, map of Europe, this is a pretty good one to keep in mind, because, as we get back into researching Eastern Europe, often we're getting into this period of pre-World War I fairly quickly, and this map was more or less, relatively stable through much of the 1900s and early 20th century. And a lot of the records are organized according to these boundaries in the historical archives. After World War I, the map of Europe was redrawn, and Germany losing some territory, Austria-Hungary being broken up into multiple different countries, and Poland reemerging on the map as an independent country. Poland successfully fought a war with the Soviet Union right after World War I, and reclaimed lands in its boundaries at that time. This is a little better view of it, included parts of the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth that are today in eastern Ukraine and Belarus, as well as part of Lithuania. And then World War II changed the map of Europe again, and this is a map that many of us grew up with during the Cold War. You can see the Soviet Union and other Warsaw Pact countries there in red, Yugoslavia, which was also communist, and Albania, that were more aligned with the Eastern Bloc countries than the West. Germany, of course, was divided. And this is the map of Europe today. It's still changing. In fact, depending on who you talk to, this map may be considered already out of date. I've penciled in Kosovo, which is in southern Serbia, which is recognized as an independent country by many countries. Russia has occupied Crimea and other portions of Ukraine, as well as parts of Georgia. And although those are still recognized as not being part of the Russian Federation. So we see that this ongoing change in the boundaries is a continuous process, though the boundaries of Europe have been relatively the same since the fall of the Berlin Wall. All right, now this is an area that people have the tendency to sometimes think of as being homogeneous, as if everybody was Slavic and used the Cyrillic alphabet, and nothing could be further from the truth. There's a huge amount of ethnic diversity and linguistic diversity in this region. These are just some examples of some of the many peoples that live here. This is a map of the former Soviet Union, showing the major ethnic groups there, Russians being in the dark red, but you can see that there are many other peoples, Turkic peoples, peoples of the Caucasus, Siberian peoples, and other Indo-Europeans. In Russia alone, there are over 190 different ethnicities, let alone all the other countries. This is one of the linguistic groups. It's not even Indo-European. This is the Uralic peoples, the Uralic language, or Finno-Ugric as it's known. It's the language that is the language group that includes Finnish and Hungarian, but actually originated around the Ural Mountains. And there are people within Russia, the Komi people, the Nenets, Permians, Udmurtians, etc., that are of this ethno-linguistic group. This is a map of the Austrian Empire. This kind of gives you a sense of why it was such a powder keg in Europe, and why World War I was sparked in the Austrian Empire, because you don't have neat boundaries of where different ethnic groups lived. And this is really a simplification of just the major dominant groups in the different parts of the empire. It would be a much more colorful map if you were to try to note everybody that was living here. I'm just going to show you a few more examples of these types of maps. Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova, you can see more linguistic diversity there. This is the Caucasus region. It's really quite a patchwork of different peoples and religions. You've got Armenians, who claim to be the first Christian nation, living right next to Azerbaijanis, who are predominantly Muslim people. The Baltic states, perhaps among the more homogeneous, but nevertheless not completely, as you can see here on the left. Polish, which is represented in green, is spoken through a lot of Belarus and Lithuania. There are a lot of Russian minorities because of the Russian Empire and later Soviet influence in these countries as well. And on the right, you can see that Lithuanian isn't all the same. There's different dialects. There's 4 major dialectical regions, and within them, within those, there's subdialects. Poland, this is interwar Poland boundaries between World War I and World War II. Again, a lot of Poles living throughout the region, but they're living side by side with Ukrainians, Belarusians, Germans, and others. And of course, absolutely not to be forgotten are the many millions of Jews who lived in this area, especially in Poland, but also in the area of the Russian Empire known as the Pale of Settlement. You can see on the right, even though it's in Hebrew, you get the sense that the darker colors represent the percentages of Jews living in those regions, which with as many as 17% of the population being Jewish in parts of Poland. There is also a huge German diaspora throughout this region, not only in the areas of the former German Empire, but throughout Central and Eastern Europe. Catherine the Great invited Germans to come and colonize in the Russian Empire, especially in newly conquered lands in, around the Black Sea area, and also the Volga region around Saratov. All right, so here's some key points to take away about the history and culture of this region. One is, the definitions of Eastern Europe vary. Boundaries, of course, have changed a lot. You probably already knew that. It's a very diverse area ethnically and linguistically. Actually, most of the population, even though Russia is the largest by far geographically and has the largest population, the majority of people in Eastern Europe actually don't use the Cyrillic alphabet, and many of them are not Slavic peoples. Feudalism ended relatively late, especially in the Russian Empire, and property ownership remained rare even after the abolishment of serfdom. Record keeping also developed relatively later compared to Western Europe, especially the further east you go. The records vary widely from place to place, but there is a high degree of uniformity within the historic boundaries for certain periods. So, it's both kind of a blessing and a curse. And then another thing to keep in mind is there are still today vestiges of the imperial and communist or socialist norms that impact research. Just to give you an idea of the extent of immigration of Eastern European peoples into North America, this is just some figures by the US Census Bureau from 2006, showing that those that answered that they're either their first ancestry or their second ancestry was from an Eastern European country was 23 million Americans, or over almost 8%, or about 1 in 12 people in the United States in 2006 claimed East European ancestry, either primary or secondary. And the numbers for Canada are very much very similar to this. So there's a huge amount of interest in this area. I am continually surprised to find out that even in Utah, which you might think might have not too many people from Eastern Europe here, I keep finding more and more people who have ancestry from there, including a neighbor right across the street from me. All right, I want to dispel a few myths. And the number one myth that you hear about Eastern European research is that all the records were destroyed because the communists or the Nazis, right? But in fact, billions, or even I should say trillions of records ultimately still exist. And they've mostly been well preserved. The Soviets actually saw the records as being something to their advantage, and so they gathered them up into archives, and they established an archival system that was really hierarchical, is based on principles of archival science established in Paris in the 1940s, and really endeavored and have continued since the end of the Soviet Union to preserve those records. And other countries of the former other former Iron Curtain countries have largely done the same. So it's not so much a question of whether the records exist, but where to find them. And more are becoming available online. During the 1990s and early 2000s, FamilySearch did a lot of microfilming in this area. And since then, they've digitized all of their microfilm and made it available online. We'll take a closer look at that, the numbers of that in a moment. This is just a sampling of some of the types of records that are available. Religious, birth, marriages, and deaths are probably the most commonly acquired record and microfilmed or digitized record. You can also find church household registers, or like parish censuses, confession lists, that type of thing, lists of the members or the congregants of a certain parish or congregation. To a varying extent, depending on the country, you can find civil registration records as well. There are censuses and other lists. I will say, however, there was really no equivalent to the US or Canadian or UK decennial censuses, where you have an enumeration of the entire population on a 10-year interval. There are censuses, but they tend to be scattered, fragmented, inconsistently administered, and in a lot of cases, they gathered the statistical information from it, but then had no plans for preservation of the household listings, and so their survival is spotty. And they're not indexed for the most part, except to some limited extent for some regions and some ethnic groups. So that makes it really challenging, and we'll talk a bit later about the consequence of that. I mean, you can probably imagine some of the consequences of that, of course. Military records are another type of record that you see a lot of conscription lists, casualty lists, service records, those type of things. And there's lots of other cool unique, different record types that are coming more and more all the time. It's really hard to keep up with it all, honestly. This is a summary of the records that are online on FamilySearch from Eastern European countries, totaling over 138 million images, in particular from places like Russia, Ukraine, Poland, but also significant numbers from Czechia and Hungary, Slovakia, etc. Yet this is just a drop in the bucket. This is a view of how far FamilySearch has gotten in their acquisition efforts. The green oblasts represent the state archives where FamilySearch completed their priority 1 scanning of vital records and censuses that were just those that were in the state archives. They didn't get to any regional or municipal archives. And then the light blue represent those that were partially scanned. And as you can see, most of the country is still gray. Unfortunately, in 2008, the acquisition efforts of FamilySearch came to a halt in Russia, as well as in Belarus and Ukraine for a time. FamilySearch has had better success filming and digitizing in Poland, both in the government archives as well as in the church archives, especially the Roman Catholic Church. In the Czech Republic, these are places where there has been digitization in partnership with the local archives. So the archives have posted a copy online, and FamilySearch also has a copy online. Here's the map of Ukraine. Again, the dark green being where they completed projects, and the light blue where they had incomplete projects. And 2011 was when they were able to take their last microfilm image. And just until last year, that was the last that FamilySearch was able to get out of Ukraine. But some good news for Ukraine is that FamilySearch signed a new agreement in 2020, and they are now scanning in 3 archives with digital cameras. And we're, even now as we speak, getting records out of Ukraine, and you can check them out on FamilySearch. If you click on FamilySearch and click on images, then you can see those records coming online even before they're cataloged. Also in Ukraine, there is an ambitious genealogist. He's just a private citizen, an individual who has a passion for genealogy research, particularly Jewish genealogy. And he has been taking an approach similar to the Reclaim the Records effort here in the United States, where he is appealing to the archives to allow him to digitize their records on the basis of the law, which allows for that. The archives routinely deny the permission to scan, and then he takes them to court and wins, and then he's able to scan the records. And he's been putting thousands of records online, and he's recruited others to help, and they've expanded beyond Jewish records to other religious groups, as well as common record sets, including some of those fragments of the censuses that still survive today. Ancestry.com isn't necessarily the place to go to find a lot of records for Eastern Europe proper, like records that are from those countries originally, but it is really a great resource for tracing immigrant origins. You really need to start out doing your homework in the country of immigration, searching for records that give you clues to their origins. But they also have partnered with FamilySearch, and they have other partnerships, including with a number of different Jewish organizations and with the Arlson Archives in Germany, which holds the International Tracing Service records of the Red Cross, which was tasked after World War II with helping to track down displaced persons. They also confiscated many records from the Allies, confiscated records from the Nazis about internments and concentration camps and other documentation of the Holocaust, which the Arlson Archives has, and Ancestry has been digitizing and indexing a lot of those records in partnership with them. Many other websites have come about in the past 30 years, putting records online, especially the last 10 to 15 years. Most of the countries of Eastern Europe have national and regional archive websites where they have posted records. These are just a few examples. The Polish State Archives or National Archives has a great deal of records, civil registration, and church records online. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, I mentioned Czech Republic earlier, and others. So there isn't time to tell you about all the reasons help you with discovering more of those, but I'm just sharing to kind of give you a sampling that there's a ton of material that's out there. A ton of it is becoming available. And so there's lots to be excited about there. Records being destroyed, that did occur, but it was more isolated cases, not like a systematic program of record destruction by the Soviets or the Nazis. In fact, they were more likely to preserve records than to destroy them. All right, myth number 2. East European research is totally different than research that you know. Well, in fact, there's actually more in common than there is different. Families in Russia are like families in the US. Looking at these two pictures, you might not be able to tell, that the one on the left is my dad and his parents in central Utah in the 1950s, and on the right is an Eastern European family. The family relationships were similar. Our goals of research are the same. We want to prove their identity and their relationships and tell their stories. And while there are differences in the language, format, and accessibility of records, there are also many parallels to research elsewhere. You still need to move from the known to the unknown, just like in any other research. You're going to want to start out by talking with relatives and gathering all the living memory that you can. You're going to want to go through all of your family documents and talk to cousins and aunts and uncles and find out what they have in their attics and basements and bring those clues together. You need to research in the country that they immigrated to in order to find those clues to their origins. When tracing immigrant origins, you're not only looking for the specific place of origin, the specific town where they were born, for example, but you're also gathering family context. And we'll talk about why that's really important in a moment. Once you have the specific place of origin and you've gathered enough family context, then and only then are you ready to cross the pond, as it were, and begin researching in the place of origin. And you're going to want to study the context of that place, the history, and then, of course, ultimately, your goal is to verify their origin by finding them in original records. Resources like gazetteers and maps abound, and many of them available online to assist with that effort. And just like other research that you are used to, your next step after you've determined their place of origin is to look for records and access them in whatever format that you can. And then, of course, you're going to analyze those records, and you're going to draw out the evidence from them and make sound conclusions. And in all of this, you want to always follow the genealogical proof standard, which applies just as much in Eastern European research as it does in US or Canadian or other research. Now, while there are a lot of commonalities between Eastern Europe and say North American research or UK research, there are also special challenges. Every region of the world will have challenges to research, and some may find Eastern Europe more difficult than others, though it really depends on your perspective. These challenges have parallels with other geographic areas, but just as Eastern Europe's history is distinct from others and very diverse, the specific manifestations of these challenges are unique. We already talked about the historical geography and boundaries changing a lot. That results in things like this happening, where you have a country that was known by one name in Germany, having a completely different sounding name and being part of other jurisdictions in a different country. If you actually travel there, you may not see a whole lot of difference between how things look today and how they looked 150 years ago, except that the road signs are changing to the different place names. Of course, there are a lot of, while the landscape may be very similar to the way it was back then, of course, there's a lot of differences in terms of the the politics and the records that are kept now versus then. This is one resource I really highly recommend to help you sort out the historical geography. It is Paul Robert Magoshi's Historical Atlas of Central Europe. Now, it focuses on what he defines as Central Europe, which I include as part of Eastern Europe, but it really is useful for Central or Eastern Europe. A great resource that's often overlooked is just Wikipedia. Lots of great articles. You can find articles about individual countries, individual former duchies and kingdoms, and constituent provinces and states of those countries, modern and historic. One tip with using Wikipedia is don't just stick to the English language version. You can click over and see the native language versions. So for example, a Russian version of Wikipedia, you're going to find more information about Russian places on the Russian Wikipedia than you are on the English language Wikipedia. It's not just a translation of the article, it is a whole different article that's in Russian and usually has a lot more information. Then the same is true for Hungary or Estonia or wherever you may be looking. And just use Google Translate to wade through it if you don't speak the language, which, as we'll talk about in a moment, you don't have to learn to speak the language. I talked earlier about there being a wide variety of different record types. Of course, they come in a variety of different formats, different languages. But one nice thing is that there was a high degree of uniformity within geographic areas. So for example, for Russian Empire, for the period of the empire, they had standard forms for all the church records. And so if you're looking, whether you're looking in the far east of the empire or the north or the south, you're going to find basically the same format for all of the Russian Orthodox Church records or all of the Jewish congregation records for a particular time period. So that's nice. Now, there are billions of records online now, but it's still the tip of the iceberg. This is not necessarily to scale, but even with all that's been done in the last 30 years, we're still just have a minority of the records available online. And that little green patch at the top of the iceberg represents what is indexed name by name. So most of what's online is without name indexes, and therefore you have to browse to it. There's a ton of stuff on paper in archives, and there's a bunch of stuff we don't know where it is. But we are hopeful that it will be discovered ultimately. Just as one example of this, I have a colleague, works at the Family History Library. She was traveling in Poland a few years back and asked to see the church records at a Roman Catholic church. And they said, you are in luck because for decades these were lost, but we did a remodel in the church, broke through a brick wall, and there encased in the wall were the parish registers. So you just never know when things may turn up. One of the consequences of things not being indexed is that you can't rely on search boxes like this. I usually tell people, go ahead and try it, but just be aware that the vast majority of the content is not indexed, so you're going to need to browse to it. So you're going to want to click on the map to the right if you're on FamilySearch, for example, and then you're going to want to drill down by the locality and the year and the record type, and then browse image by image to find the records. It requires you to really mine deeper in search of records rather than just relying on global search boxes on the most popular websites. Now, we talk about doing family history research as finding a needle in a haystack sometimes. But when it comes to Eastern Europe, the first problem is figuring out which haystack you need to search in to begin with. You really need to know the specific place of origin before you begin. Because you don't have those censuses, in the US or Canada, if I just knew that my ancestor was in the US in 1910, I can search the census and use the census to figure out where he was living. But that doesn't fly with Eastern European research. You have to first figure out where they came from and then try to find records for that place. Too often when you're looking at records, you see this type of thing where it just says Russia, Poland, or Lithuania or something, a very non-helpful indication of where they lived. I mean, it's somewhat helpful, but certainly not enough to get you where you need to go. You're looking for something more like this, where you can see although there's some inconsistencies here, it says he was in Poland, Litva in Poland, but then it also says Litva and Russia. And if you do a little research on that, you'll see that Litva is the German or Polish spelling of Lithuania, and which was part of Poland at one point. It was part of Russia at one point. And the place you're really looking for is this Baranovici. But even when you get this holy grail of information of that specific town of origin, you still have the problem of variants. These are just a handful of the variants that you might find for this town of Baranovici, spelled in various languages and in various alphabetic scripts. Another challenge is that even if you do find the place that they came from, it's not necessarily the place that held the records, because not every town had a church or a civil registration office, but these smaller towns went to church or went to do their civil registration elsewhere. In genealogy, we also think hierarchically. We want to search for records at different levels of hierarchy, town, county, state, country. But in Eastern Europe, of course, over time, those change. The town doesn't move anywhere, but its name may be spelled differently, and it may be part of different higher levels of jurisdiction over time. Another big thing is that you have a lot of places with the same name. This is a search for Baranovici and similarly spelled towns using the FamilySearch Places online gazetteer and map. And as you can see, there's dozens of places that match that search. But tools like FamilySearch's Places feature can be really helpful in starting to sort these things out and narrow down those options. Another example of a great tool is JewishGen's Communities database. Even if you're not a Jewish researcher or your ancestors weren't Jewish, JewishGen is a great resource for Eastern Europe in general, because it includes records and reference information, including this communities database, that apply to more than just Jews. And yet another example of something that can help in sorting out places when there are variant spellings is the Fuzzy Gazetteer. There should be a link to this in your handout. The Fuzzy Gazetteer, you can type in however it was spelled, however your grandma said it and your mom heard it and wrote it down. You put that in and you can potentially find out what it really was originally, as opposed to how it sounded. Sometimes these places and personal names get handed down to us kind of like the phone game that we played when we were kids, where you whisper in each other's ear and you go around a circle, and by the time you get to the end, it's just gobbledygook. That's what happens to our ancestral names of places and people. There's a lot of online maps and gazetteers, as I mentioned, that can assist you with navigating the place problems. Names also are a challenge because they can be all over the place. This is just one surname of my dad's uncle, spelled 10 different ways. And yeah, I could easily find, as many more in other records. Just like with place names, there are also resources to help you navigate personal names and surnames, name dictionaries in print and online, name distribution maps, and things like that. So here's just some general tips for resolving research problems. This is also in your handout. As you're going through doing your research and starting in that place where they immigrated to, you're going to want to gather all possible clues and context. You don't want to get over there into the records, having found the right place and getting into the right church or synagogue records, only to find that there are 10 Ivan Ivanoviches, with a daughter being born the same year named Maria. With that additional family context that you gather along the way, you can sort out people with the similar names. Identify as many variant spellings as you can and search on those. Don't rely on derivative sources such as indexes or abstracts, but try to get a copy of the original and analyze it in full in case there's transcription errors. Use wildcards and other advanced search techniques. Think phonetically as well as visually when you're doing spelling variants. So not only is it helpful to know, for example, that a V and a W or an F may be interchangeable, it's also helpful to be able to think that, the letter T, it could look like the letter G in Russian, which is like a G, and that the indexer may have fouled it up because they visually, got it wrong. And then the more you can study about the history and geography, the better off you'll be because you'll pick up on things that help you along the way. Some common mistakes to avoid, this is also in your handout. Don't just stop at what you find online or what's indexed. Don't ignore other available records on or offline. Don't just get hung up on what you might consider to be the quote unquote correct or standard spelling. Don't just try to find the one record that gives the answer because it really doesn't exist. You have to gather lots of evidence and analyze it and compare it. Don't just get tunnel vision on the ancestor. Remember those friends and associates, neighbors, siblings, and branch out to them to help trace back. Sometimes it's better to go a little forward before you go back. Go to the children, grandchildren, or even great-grandchildren in the immigrant country for clues that go back to that immigrant ancestor. And of course, don't make assumptions or hasty conclusions based on your biases. All right. Languages are another challenge, especially things that are in Cyrillic. You get things like this, where in Poland in the early 1800s, you see records in Latin. And then in the same parish, some years later, you're going to see the records in Polish. And then you go a few years later in the same parish, and now the records are in Russian. Here's another example. This is in Western Ukraine, where you have a Latin form with Latin column headings, but then the information underneath may be written in Ukrainian or in Polish, or sometimes German, or sometimes Russian. Now, another myth is that you could never learn to read these records. And taking a page from Obama's book, yes, we can. You don't have to become fluent. You can take advantage of all kind of little cheats, quote unquote, or helps to assist you. Nobody's testing you on this, on memorizing or fluent speaking. It's an open book process. So, have your alphabet guides, have translation guides such as this one that give you the format of the records and the common terms that are found in those records. FamilySearch has genealogical word lists for pretty much all of the different languages of Eastern Europe. Where they have records online, FamilySearch will also break down those records in many cases. In the research wiki, you can find examples with callouts giving you the definitions of the column headings. There are things like the BYU script tutorial where you can learn old German handwriting, and they're working to add other handwriting helps. Just as a to let you know, I'm working with a student right now on one for Russian, so that's coming. There's one already for Latin. Ultimately, there'll be other languages added there. You might take some comfort in knowing that even natives struggle with the old records, and unless they've studied some paleography or archaic terms, they may not be able to read the old records themselves. But there are many people like you who can hardly pronounce an intelligible word in another language, but who can successfully trace their lineage in records in another language with much better success than the average native. It takes determination. It takes having tools in your toolkit that you can reach for and look stuff up, and you make your way through it. And you don't have to do it alone. There are a lot of people to help you. Webinars like this one, of course, conferences, libraries and archives, where there are people that can give you reference help. FamilySearch is a great resource with their research wiki. Each one of the East European countries has its own dedicated page with lots of links to information about record types and about the language, the handwriting, gazetteers, map resources, and on and on. One of the most helpful things is on any of the country pages, you'll generally find a link to online records for that country. So you don't have to keep track of all the different resources that I've mentioned or that you may have heard of that exist for your country that you're researching. You can go to the FamilySearch Research Wiki and look for it there. And if they're missing a link that you know of, it's an open edit wiki, so please feel free to log in and edit and add that resource to the wiki so that others may benefit. Besides FamilySearch, there's lots of others that are providing records and information, how-to information and reference resources. Jewish Gen is one example. There's many other genealogical societies for Germans from Russia, for Poles, for Hungarians. There's also societies that look across Eastern Europe as a whole, like the Foundation for East European Family History Studies, that can provide helpful information. Social media is a great resource. Facebook, FamilySearch communities, and others where you can post queries. You can even upload images of documents and potentially have people help you translate those documents. Lots of people willing to help one another with their genealogy. You can get references if you're looking to hire a researcher. Contact people who have already done it in the past and get recommendations from them. And there's more and more genealogical societies that are offering conferences and other events. And these are just a few examples. Just last week, we held the FIF's virtual conference. I think it was our 27th year that we were holding that conference. IAJGS, the Jewish Genealogy Conference, is in their 41st year. And then there's others like this Krakow Genealogy Conference, which just held their first recently, as there's more awareness in Eastern Europe proper among the people there of genealogy, and the interest is growing there and societies are forming. It's kind of tended to be a phenomenon that's been more kind of in the West as we're looking to our heritage from before, but it's also something of growing interest among the people who are still living there. So while it is a challenge, you're not in it alone. There are people to help you. Persistence is a virtue for genealogists. A determined genealogist doesn't give up when the going gets tough. This is as important in Eastern European research as anywhere, and perhaps more so because the obstacles are relatively high. We mustn't quail from records in a foreign language or alphabet. We can gather whatever tools we can to overcome that barrier. Don't assume that an initial negative search means an ancestor isn't to be found. We can apply our search skills to overcome name variations, indexing errors, browse for records when the indexing fails or is non-existent. And we won't end our search with online collections, but go on to search for records on other sites or on microfilm or on original paper records. And if we have to, obtain them through correspondence, travel, hiring a researcher. In short, we do whatever it takes to find the information so that we can do the analysis and make sound conclusions.